Greetings. I thought I would tackle the subject of the Tartarian Empire in this video, in this Unlocking the Matrix presentation number 39. So, what do we know about Tartaria? And another question that has occurred to me is, what is the typical day of a Tartarian? I don't think anybody has actually asked this question yet. What we do know of Tartaria is it exists on all the ancient maps, and it has been speculated that it was a worldwide culture based on knowledge and doing things from the heart. It may just be a utopian wishful dream, but certainly it does seem to point in that direction. Now, one of the things associated with this Tartarian Empire is star forts, and I happened to be looking at Google Maps only yesterday, and I looked at nearby Felixstowe, which is only 12 miles away. Now, like all these massive features, when you're up close, they never appear, you never sort of get the shape because of their massive structure. But I had a look on Google Earth. This is Landguard Fort at Felixstowe, right by the docks. It's right on the very tip of the land. Now, is that not a star fort in its shape? Now, forget about all the history that they tell you at the museum and everything else. That is clearly a star fort. So, as I have suggested with the styles of architecture within Ipswich, that you have two completely different civilizations. Now, very interestingly, leading on or following on from what I've shown before, we've got these. We have the original Tooley's and Smarts Foundation, and in the former domestic range of the Dominican friar preachers. And I'll just show this sketch again. Now, this would have been over the foundation stones that we're told that was no good as a building material, but clearly this must have been built in that area. And very interesting, if you look down at this landscape, it does look to be mud flooded. Very interesting, some of these little sketches, what they show. And here we have another one of two. Let me just read this. Tooley's Almshouses. The engraving from Pauli's Ladies' Fashionable Repository of 1854 shows the residents at the time enjoyed less privacy from the street. The front railings set quite low down, line rampart supports. Now, you'll notice if you look very carefully at this picture, you've got this Antiquitech here on this building. I would suggest that is to do with transference of energy, and also notice it does look to be almost like a mud. Now, we go on to looking at the lay of the land of Ipswich and how this all fits in. Now, it's encoded in the road names. On the older maps, it will show, and it's an area that's not really been built on until very recent years, and it goes sort of through the football ground to this recreation ground. You can see where there's part of the River Gipping, which comes to an abrupt halt and it goes underground. This recreation ground is notorious for getting very boggy and marshy at certain times of the year, as are a lot of the parks and where there has not been any development on them. And on the older maps, this river follows this course down to Stoke Bridge, as well as the River Gipping today. This is where it becomes from the tidal River Orwell to the non-tidal River Gipping. Now, I've mentioned this before about these natural springs, and you've got Upper Brook Street and Lower Brook Street. You'll notice there's two churches there. There is another church here, another one up here. Now, you've also got Upper and Lower Orwell Streets, which run straight down again, and you have this church here, or what would have been this priory as well. And there's another church over here. You've also got Rope Walk and Spring Lane, which joins into this further out. So we just switch to the screen. So if we go to Spring Road, I think you can get the idea here that you've got this railway bridge, these fantastic arches, and you can see how low this ground is here, and to the left is still allotments. It's not been built on. I would suggest Spring Road takes its name from a natural spring that runs down this way. Now it could well be that spring follows Rope Walk. I mean, maybe it's a reference to the mud floods, and they did have a roped walkway because it was too boggy at one time. Bearing in mind how much lower the water is, and since the mud floods, our surface is much higher. But bear in mind, this would have been tidal. Now, another very interesting thing with this, these natural springs in Christchurch Park, you've got this Bethesda Church. Now, I had a look at what Bethesda means, and very interestingly, the name Bethesda occurs only once in the Bible. It was a name of a pool near a sheep gate of Jerusalem, upon which an angel of the Lord periodically descended and stirred the water. When that happened, the first person to plunge into the pool will be healed of whatever affliction the person had. And I've brought a picture up of it, and you can see it does look like Roman baths. Now, we're expected to believe that this was built in 1912. But as with all these other buildings, I cannot find any photographs, lithographs or anything showing its construction. So I'm suggesting what they do, where they repurpose these buildings, that all these churches are actual healing centres, because they seem to be centred around water. I mean, the river would be underground and running directly under this building down into Upper Brook Street and Lower Brook Street. So that's very interesting in itself. So I'm suggesting what you actually had in Ipswich at one time, you had, as you still have now, the River Gipping going up here. As on the older maps, another part of this River Gipping going up this way, and then also 3 more tributaries that ran to this natural spring, along another tributary here, which possibly even came from the allotments which are up here. I mean, this water is, it does flood parts of these parks. That water is still running, and it is just artificially dammed basically, but it still must release and trickle some of it through under these what are now roads. And the same with Spring Road. Now, I have yet to take a photo of it, but this church along here, you can clearly see an archway on the side passage that indicates that there is a much lower level, and the same with the houses, along with all these other streets where these courses that I'm suggesting were tributaries to this River Orwell, that they've all got lower levels. The door heights are nonsensical, and the foot scrapers are the only thing that are at the current street level, but they're quite an easy thing to add in anyway. Now, it's not actually showing not much of it's showing on this map. I would suggest that this artificial island, when they put in this lock-gated wet dock that maintains a non-tidal constant height, which would have been for the unloading of vessels, that is where some of this mud flood and building material has actually ended up until they can use it. So I'm going to suggest that part of a Tartarian's life would be to do with these healing centres, when they're basically hospitals of the day, using sound, using magnetic energy of earth, and also for pumping water, because the positions of these churches now starts to make sense. I mean, why would you have, for example, this is quite a large church, and so is this one. But there are a few houses up here, but certainly not enough to warrant these two massive structures. But if they are used as water pumping stations, now they start to make a lot more sense, and also the positions of the other churches. So I'll leave that there. That's something to definitely to think about with all this to do with Tartaria. You'll also notice on the old maps that they don't mention the Roman Empire, and as Martin Leaker has shown several times, this Roman or Greco-Roman civilization seems to figure rather a lot in the 16th century in the old books. So I'm going to leave this with just one more view of this Landguard fort at Felixstowe in Suffolk. And do have a look on Google Maps and see what you think, but that definitely looks exactly like a star fort. And it is on a strategic point, again, right by water. And it has been suggested that these also are to do with the pumping of water, maybe to clear the mud-flooded land of the excess water so they can then reuse it after this cataclysmic event. So I'll leave that up to you, and tell me what you think. Leave comments, please, and like, subscribe and share. Thank you very much.